My name's Randy Schiefer. I'm 70 years old. I had my NDE when I was 67, 3 years ago, and I live just right outside of Pensacola, Florida. So it's we've been here for about 8 years, and we just really love the area. This is where I caught COVID. I don't know how I got it or where I got it from, but it was in March of 2020 when I got sick. And I was so sick that I was hospitalized. And after being in the hospital for 24 hours, went straight onto a ventilator. I was on the ventilator for just over 24 hours when I maxed out the ventilator and went into acute respiratory failure. And they put me on a helicopter and they flew me over to a larger hospital in Pensacola where I underwent surgery and for and I went on the ECMO machine. It's a total heart lung bypass machine since I was in acute respiratory failure. After being there for just a few hours, I went into renal failure. My kidneys failed, and I went into dialysis. And then my liver enlarged, and it was throwing off some blood clots throughout my body. So basically, you know, all my major organs were affected. And at one point, they called and said that they gave me about a 3% chance of living and that they should probably prepare for my probable demise. And so it was during this period, and a matter of fact, it was just, I went into the hospital on March the 26th of 2020, and I got out of the hospital on May the 9th of 2020. So I was in the hospital for 6 weeks, in a coma for 4 weeks. And it was during that period of time that I experienced four near-death experiences. And I have no idea what order that these came in, but I remember I was in a tunnel, a black tunnel, and I wasn't traveling real fast, but I was moving through this tunnel. And the tunnel was wrapped with light. The light didn't permeate into the tunnel and brighten the inside up, but I could tell that it was very bright on the outside of this tunnel. And I felt so relaxed and so much at peace. And I knew I died. I remember saying to myself, okay, you're dead, but where are we going? And the next thing I knew, I woke up inside of a beautiful building. I was standing there and admiring the beauty of this room. And it was gold and it had big arches. I remember three arches on each side of the room, just arched in gold inlay and beautiful stained glass windows up above the arches and big chandeliers hanging down from the ceiling with water features. And it was that, and I was standing on a mezzanine looking down into this room. It was absolutely stunning. And it's just the colors and what you felt standing there is just so hard to describe because it's nothing that you can feel here on earth, but you're at such a peace and you feel so warm and loved. And a gentleman walked over to me, and he was an olive complected gentleman, dark hair and a dark beard, and he had like a robe on, like a brown robe. And he came over to me, almost floated over. And I told him the beauty of this room and how beautiful it was. And I said, "What is this room? What is this room?" And he goes, "Oh, it's one of our most favorite places." He said it gets the most visitors, and he says, "But you don't belong here." He says, "You have to leave." And he pointed over to a set of oak doors, beautiful oak doors, big, magnificent oak doors, all hand carved. And I remember I passed through and somebody was with me. I don't know who, but I sensed and I felt that somebody was with me, almost guiding me through this. And we went through these oak doors and we moved down a set of steps. And it was in a beautiful city, absolutely magnificent golden city. The buildings were just as high as you could see up into the sky, just gold. The windows were like a opaque. The streets, I mean, were not any cars or buses, but the streets of the city was just kind of a gold, opaque, clear uh, material. It was just absolutely stunning. And I remember moving through the streets and passing parks, beautiful, beautiful maintained parks. The grass was so green. And I've traveled to the Highlands of Scotland and Ireland, and I've seen some magnificent, beautiful green grass, but nothing compared to what I saw there. There was children off in this park playing. I remember seeing them way in the back playing. And I was moving through this city, and I suddenly got lost, and I became very scared. And I because I didn't know my way back. I didn't know how to get back. And I sat down on a curb like side of the street there, and I got very anxious and I got very scared and I was crying and it got very cold because I couldn't find my way back. And although I could see people or I felt people moving back and forth, I couldn't see them. And I was screaming out to them, please help me. And suddenly I looked over my shoulder and I saw this beautiful white staircase going up into the clouds, way as far as you could see. And I said, if I can make it over to that staircase, maybe somebody will find me. So I made my way over, and I remember like the sensation of crawling up this staircase. And I have no idea how high I got, or I can't tell you. But all of a sudden, I heard somebody yell my name. There he is. There's Randy. Get him. And it almost felt like somebody grabbed me by the scuff of my neck and just whisked me off of those stairs. And when I was whisked off of those stairs, everything around me went black, black. I was back into my dark little sedated world. Everything just kind of shut down. But my conscious came to light again, and I was moving down a pathway, beautiful pathway, dirt pathway, and on the side of this pathway were beautiful flowers and beautiful trees. And off in the distance, you could see beautiful meadows and of grass, just as far as you could see. And a stream or a river ran through this meadow, and I just taking in the beauty. And again, I knew I died. I consciously said to myself, "You're dead," but what's happening? Suddenly, this little boy comes out, appeared from nowhere, and I would say maybe 10 years old. He had long dark hair, like a bowl haircut, with the bangs and things. No shirt on, 3/4 length little shorts, barefoot, olive skin, and he was uh, animated, very animated little boy. He was waving his arms, follow me. So he took me down this pathway further, and we entered into another room. And again, this room was beautiful. Um, had big picture windows and beautiful leather seats around the room. And he told me to wait there, that he would be back. So I walked over to one of the picture windows, and that river that I described out in the meadow ran underneath this building. And I was sitting watching this river, and there was people, human figures, um, in the water, not frolicking and playing and stuff, but they were over on the sides, over on the banks of the river. And it looked to me like they were just kind of enjoying the river and enjoying the day and maybe sitting there and talking or something. But again, it's just beautiful, these magnificent, beautiful flowers and red, green, orange, blue flowers just covered the whole area. And I have no clue how long I was there, how long I waited. But the little boy comes back and he says, "I'm sorry, you have to leave." And I said, "No, I don't want to leave." I said, "I feel so at peace and so calm and comforting." I said, "I feel so loved." I said, "I don't want to leave." And he goes, "I'm sorry, your room isn't ready. You have to leave." And with that, I was back into my dark little sedated world. The feeling that you have is just absolutely undescribable. It's just, I mean, I was always afraid of death. I would go into panic attacks when I thought about my own death. And I was a criminal homicide detective for 30 years. I mean, that's what I investigated, but I couldn't even talk about my own death without going into a panic attack. So for me to feel so much calm and at peace with the knowledge that I died was just something I had never experienced before. But I remember my consciousness coming awake another time. It felt like I was just at the end of that tunnel again, but I came out into a void, a very dark void. It wasn't pitch black, but it was a deep gray. I mean, it was just almost like dusk, late dusk. We could just barely make out figures and things, and these orbs of light were passing by me. And this one orb of light came up, and he telepathically told me I knew I was supposed to follow him. And he took me deeper into this void. And as we moved into the void, you've been to the theater and you're standing there on a completely dark black stage. And then suddenly a little light comes on over in the corner and it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And you see the actress or the actor standing there on the corner of the stage. Suddenly, my mother in law, my deceased mother in law, appeared that same way. That little light started to come on and got brighter and brighter and brighter. And there she was. She was sitting there. And I recognized her immediately. And I started to call her out to her, "Dolores, Dolores, it's Randy. I'm here, I'm here." And she was sitting, and she was sitting very regally. I mean, straight and tall and proud. And her hand was resting on the armchair. Her right arm was resting on the armchair, and her other arm was resting on some type of a counter. And she was dressed in this beautiful white gown with a white sash around her waist, and her hair was pulled up like into a bun, and she wore this beautiful white ribbon around the top of her head. And she looked over at me only briefly, and I was yelling and screaming at her, you know. And then she looked away. She wouldn't acknowledge me. My guide told me we need to move further, deeper into the void. And as we started to go deeper, way in the back, and something very unique about being in heaven is that you can sense and know what's going on around you for 360 degrees. And so I knew way back and behind me, her light was slowly dimming and slowly going off until she just disappeared. And a young man came running by us very quickly. And it was my deceased brother in law, probably a teenager, um, very young. And I knew it in an instant that I knew it was my deceased brother in law. He passed us. We stepped moving into the void, and suddenly, way in the back, way in the distance of this void, this light started to come on again. And I knew in a second that it was my mom, my dad, and my deceased sister standing there. I knew it. And I started yelling at them, Mom, Dad, Gina, it's me. It's Randy, I'm here, I'm here. And they only looked at me. They were some way distance away from me, so it was hard to see, but I got the sense that they were looking at me, but then they all looked away. And they didn't want me to pass further. They didn't want me to come further because I definitely felt that there was some type of a barrier in front of me. And it was moving along with us as we moved into this void. And I don't think they wanted me to pass. My kids told me it was the veil of death, and they didn't want me to come through because I was not a very religious person. I don't have any religious background. I was baptized Lutheran, became a Catholic so my girls could attend Catholic school. My wife is a lifelong Catholic, but I was a doubter. I was a skeptic. You know, I wasn't sure if all of this even existed. So as we were standing there, and that light started to go off over my parents, way behind me in the distance, off to my right, for some reason, this orb of light caught my attention. And it was moving very, very quickly. This orb of light came up to me very fast. And he stops right in front of me. And now I was in the Air Force for 20 years, so I'm a veteran. And the word veteran just was repeating itself over and over and over again. Veteran, 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 veteran. And this image stops and his face materializes just for a brief second. And he says to me, tell Madison at the salon her grandfather's okay. And he moved over onto a white porch. And there was somebody with him. I don't know who it was. It was some type of a light figure there that was with him. And he started making red, white, and blue ribbons and American flags, red, white, and blue flags. And very shortly after that, my guide told me, he says, you have to leave. You have to go back. And I was gone. Everything went black. I was back. So when they came out of my coma, I was telling my daughter all of this. And when I finally got released from the hospital, I had to learn to walk again. And I was in a wheelchair. And it was probably about maybe 8 to 12 weeks before, since I had a haircut. I mean, I was looking pretty shabby, and so I wanted to get my hair cut, but COVID was going on. I didn't know what the barbershops, because my kids, my wife and my children filled me in on what was happening, what I had missed for 6 weeks of the world. So they were filling me in about all the shutdowns, and everybody had to stay home. And so this dresser right behind me, for some reason, I started to root around. I couldn't even tell you what I was looking for, but I came across a business card to a local barbershop here in town. And I had been there a couple of times. I wasn't a regular client there, but I'd been there a few times. So I took it out to my wife and I said, could you call down, see if they're open, and see how they're handling haircuts with COVID. So I came back into my bedroom, and a few minutes later, my daughter comes in. She's the nurse, and she came in because she moved home to take care of me, to help care for me. And she started questioning me. Where did I get the card? How long have I had the card? Where did I find the card? All these questions. And I kept telling her, I said, I don't know. I said, I was looking in my dresser and it was there. I said, I don't know where I got it. I don't know anything about it. And she said, Dad, I think we found your Madison. And I said, talking about?" And she handed me the card, clearly printed, just like a business card. Printed on the card was Madison Logan. I've never seen it before. And I said, "Get me an appointment with Madison." So she did. So she drove me down, and my wife told me, she says, "No, let Lisa, our daughter, take you." She's, "I can't handle this." So my daughter went down with me, and I was in a walker, and they allowed me to come inside. Everybody else was waiting outside, but they allowed me to come inside and sit down. After a few minutes, this little girl walks up, and she goes, "Hi, I'm Madison. Are you Randy?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Okay, you're my next customer." So we go back, and I'm sitting in her chair. She's cutting my hair. And I said, "Madison," I said, "can I ask you some personal questions?" And she says, "Yeah, sure. And I said, "Are both your grandfathers still living?" And she goes, "No." She said, "The one grandfather that I was closest with died less than a year ago." Now, this was May of 2020, and he had died um, in June of 2019. Okay. And she goes, "He was the one I was closest with." And I said, "Oh," I said, "was he a veteran?" And she goes, "Yeah." She said, "He served in the army." She said, "Maybe went to Vietnam." He used to talk about it quite a bit. And I said, "Oh," I said, "did he live here in the local area?" And she said, "No, no." She says, "My whole family is from Iowa." She says, "My family lives in Iowa." Now, Iowa is about 1,900 miles to the north of me. Okay. I've never been to Iowa. And I said, "Has he ever visited this area?" Because what I was trying to do was, have I seen this man before? Maybe I ran into him. Maybe I said something to him. Maybe. But she says, no, he never had an opportunity to visit the area before he passed away. So I felt like I had the right girl, you know. And I said, "Madison," I said, "I think your grandfather came to me." My daughter had explained to her how sick I was, but she didn't mention anything about the near death experiences, just how sick I was. And I said, "I think your grandfather came to me, and he has a message for you." And I repeated the message: "Tell Madison at the salon her grandfather's okay." So after we all composed ourselves, we were all crying, and people in the barbershop were looking at us like, "Don't go to that girl, she'll make you cry." And so I finally told her, I said, "Madison," I said, "your grandfather moved on to a white porch. Is that somehow significant to you?" And she said, "That would have been his house in Iowa. He has a white porch, and he loved sitting on the white porch. He used to go out and sit and talk to the people as they would walk by the house. He loved sitting on the white porch." And I said, "Well, he was making red, white, and blue American flags and ribbons." I said, "Is that somehow significant?" She looked at me like I had a third eye. I mean, she stepped back, and after a few seconds, she composed herself, and she said, "He belonged to the American Legion in Iowa. And every Veterans Day, her whole family would go down to American Legion and make red, white, and blue ribbons and American flags for their veterans' graves." So not only, I mean, they validated it for me. You know, I didn't know this man. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know where he lived. So his name is John. So John not only gave me information of how I could find Madison by presenting me with that card, but he also gave me information that only the family would know. I didn't know the man. I didn't know the family. Never met him before. God wants us to love one another, and that's what I brought back. Now, personally, I have changed. Even my family and my friends have said how much I have changed. as a person. I'm much more open. I'm much more caring as an individual. Um, I was very much a type A personality as a criminal investigator, you know. And my master's degree is in forensic science, if you want to talk about science, you know. Um, but I'm much more laid back. I'm calm. I'm a much calmer person than I was before. Most accepting, and I think I'm more loving. And that's what I meant by COVID saved my life because I was a skeptic. I didn't believe that there was an afterlife like so many people do, or maybe people are scared of death, as I was. Like I said, I went into panic attacks thinking about my own death, you know, that my existence would just end. And that's what I believed. It was just like turning off a light switch and everything goes dark and that's the end of it, you know? That's what I believed, and that's what threw me into the panic attacks. But I've learned that there is something after this life. I experienced it, you know, and God, whatever form He may take for you, God allowed me to see it, experience it, and He gave me the evidence. As an old, crusty criminal investigator, I always needed evidence of a case, you know, to prove my case in court. I needed that evidence. God gave me that evidence. He knew that's the only way that I was going to get convinced that He existed, and He provided that to me.